Hello, peoples. It's time. We are back again after a short break due to some unforeseen circumstances involving our normal co-host. So, but we're back and we have got our scheduling set for the next 3 months, so we should be okay. So, that's just as a head, for folks who may be listening to us live. And once it goes to archive, I guess that won't really matter. So, tonight we are continuing on with our whole bad guy shtick. And, that is a very loaded phrase as far as the world of darkness, because everybody is somebody's bad guy. That's just the way this works. So, I want to introduce you to our guests for tonight. Let's start with Thijs.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Thijs Kroon. I'm from the Netherlands. I've been a storyteller for roughly 2-3 decades. I've been a great fan of Mage in particular, though I love the other splats absolutely.
Okay, and then we have a returning guest, Dan.
Hello, everybody. Dan Anktil from the Pacific Northwest. I've been an ST, a player, and a World of Darkness lore nerd for way too bloody long. Happy to be back.
All right, and the other Peter in the channel tonight, Peter Sena.
Hi, this is Peter Pena.
Oh, Pena.
I'm a long-time World of Darkness gamer, starting in 1999 with Mage the Sorcerer's Crusade, unlike everybody else who kind of got in with Vampire. I've played and run almost all of the World of Darkness games. World of Darkness anyway.
And, of course, my wonderful guest co-host who is taking time out to do this for us tonight, and I am very appreciative of said. So say hi to Sara.
Hi, everybody. I am a World of Darkness player and ST primarily for Werewolf, Changeling, and Hunter the Reckoning, and have been since I started playing Werewolf as my introductory game about 22 years ago. But I've been playing role-playing games for about 32 years.
Awesome. And I think I may have missed it. I mentioned that we're doing our bad guy shtick. This is about the Nephandi and the Marauders. And as you heard from all three of our guests, that this is a mage show. So here we go. Sara, if you would, please.
Sure. I'm going to be honest, I mostly understand mages' cosmology and backstory and sort of the driving primary goals of play and storytelling in it through the lens of other World of Darkness games, and how Mage relates to those games, particularly Werewolf and Changeling. So while I am aware of the fact that Nephandi and Marauders exist, and I have a general understanding of them, if anyone that feels like volunteering, could give me just a little bit more in-depth description. Just so anybody in our audience who might not be familiar with them could kind of have a better understanding.
Thijs, would you like me to jump in, or would you like to take the first swing?
Let's say, we'll kick off with the Nephandi then. Nephandi are technically mages whose avatars, their, so to speak, higher selves, have been twisted inside out and then, reinstalled in them by means of a process called the call. that way, all their shadow aspects come to the fore, which makes them the ultimate bad guy where it comes to wanting to destroy the actual creation as it stands now.
There is actually a changeling nerd moment. There's actually a varietal of changeling bad guy. I don't know if anybody here is conversant in changeling, called the Dauntain. That is very similar to that.
Yes.
Yeah. It's especially in the C20 version that was recently released this year. The way that the Dauntain have been rewritten is that they are very much like that. They, in their instance, they actually do something. It's a mark of sin for them. They do something so egregiously terrible that the dreaming itself goes, nope, I don't want you anymore. But it doesn't kill them, it marks them so that they will forever be reborn in this twisted, hideous shape, forever and ever, amen. And have these horrible sort of side effects that can poison the people around them, or it can damage them in some way, and they can never make it go away. And it basically twists their soul inside out and makes them hate everything creative and everything that could be ostensibly of the wild, if you're looking at the triad, that kind of thing. And it's just bad. They become the ultimate bad guys.
So one of the things that I have always tried to hammer home about the Nephandi is that with their avatars being ripped apart, being inverted, they are, in every sense, the antithesis of a standard mage tradition or technocrat, where the avatar always tries to seek ascension. They work just as hard at descent, at uncreation, at destruction, at serving their master's will to a point. But really, the point is they are motivated. They are thinking, feeling bad guys that are not going to be redeemed. They're not secretly just wounded puppies that are lashing out at the world. No, they've gone beyond that. They're irredeemable.
Which is often the fun of them for mage STs. Mm-hmm. You can introduce a villain that can manipulate, that can empathize, that can even have a degree of compassion, but it's all towards this end of descent and fundamentally descension. They aren't going for some grandiose exit. They are actively trying to bring creation back to square zero.
To an
before
absolute
anything.
End.
Yep.
And furthermore, again, there's no redemption, and they know that. So they can play upon the sympathies of their targets, making them all the more insidious as a villain. They may be playing upon the PCs, basically, they may be playing upon the PCs' attempts at reforming them, at helping them, and they may be saying, "Oh, if only I had somebody give me a chance."
I'll give you a chance. I'll give you all the chances in the world. I'll make sure you can do what you want, and I'll help you there, because everything helps me. That's what Nephandi should say. Nephandi aren't supposed to be mustache-twirling villains, as Peter said in the pre-show discussion. They aren't your classic, ah-ha-ha, I do this for my kicks.
I was saying earlier, I said a Nephandi is not a one-dimensional villain that when you foil his plot, he says, "Curses, foiled again," and then he slinks off into the shadows to not do anything. He's going to work double time to make sure that his plan comes to fruition. If he foiled it, it's just a setback. He will keep coming until he is dead.
And even then, that might
Or
be
until
part
they
of
reach their goal.
Right.
which actually their own destruction might be included.
Right.
I mean, the Mage 20 actually did a really good write-up on the motivations of Nephandi, and it really comes down to this. If they can increase apathy in the world, if they can make nihilism just normalize to the point where nothing matters, they've won.
They will try to absolutely corrupt anything at all that seems to go in the direction of creativity, change for the better, production of new ideas, or anything of the sort.
It sounds very much kind of in the language of changeling. They're very banal.
Yeah.
Except not in another way.
Well, anything that is counterproductive to creativity is inherently banal.
Well,
That's sort of the thing.
Well, yes, assuming you guys don't mind hopping into the 3, I'd argue, Forcer varieties of Nephandi, there is a subtle difference where some go into a realm of creativity that, to be entirely honest, will make people uncomfortable to discuss, even on something like this.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was the room that they mentioned in the Book of Madness, where they use it to torture people and everybody knows about it, and they do really creative and vile things there.
Yes, but to common reality, they are more of that stain. They are increasing their influence and destruction all the time, everywhere, in all aspects when it comes to destroying creativity.
So, if you guys don't mind, there are 3 official, quote-unquote, kinds of Nephandi when it comes to generally a cosmological frame. We have the Infernalists, which actually got covered in a past episode.
Mm-hmm.
The classic trade your soul to a creature of hell for power and support that flavor of corruption. Then you have the variety that outright worship the worm, work with Magian, work with Bane spirits, and work on that flavor of corruption.
The Malfeans, right?
Yep.
The Malfian Nephandi, yeah.
Yep. Then you have the third variety that are a lot more H.P. Lovecraftian. They are connected to the forces outside of reality that existed before creation, before existence, and either want to destroy creation because they can't interact with it, or want to corrupt creation to make them a lot more acceptable in creation, and thus able to interact with it.
That reminds me a little bit, it's not technically the world of darkness, but it kind of sort of is. If you look at the Exalted timeline stuff, there's I don't know if any of you have ever looked at any of the stuff for the Fae in Exalted, but if you particularly look at Graceful Wicked Masks, that's kind of if you accept that the Exalted is sort of the precursor of the world of darkness, which I know isn't technically canon anymore, but screw it, I'm doing it. If you accept that that's the thing, then Graceful Wicked Masks is the progenitor stuff for Changeling. And they have the shaped and the unshaped. And the unshaped are not at all interested in entering what we think of as consensual reality, because they've kind of got their own thing going on. They don't want to have an identity or a form or a purpose, because that's too limiting and creepy. And they are really not happy with the Fae that have chosen to become shaped and chosen to come into consensual reality and affect it in any way and form an identity. There's actually a theory that Arcadia isn't real, that it's actually an unshaped that's left over from exalted times. It's when you were talking about the idea of forces beyond reality that are shaping the nature of reality, that reminded me of that.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Also, to answer, I guess to point to one of the people in the chat, U-Wave Masquerade, you wanted to know a little bit more about those particular Nephandi. Those are called the Kalasha, and I'm probably not pronouncing it the right way at all. But
Dude,
they're the ones
just
that worship the things outside of reality.
a lot of these things were never meant to be pronounced.
That's true. That's true.
I just say that because after reviewing the stuff, anytime where there are way too many consonants put together and use apostrophes as some kind of punctuation that isn't punctuation, I give up.
I usually pronounce it as Kalasha.
Yeah.
It's as valid as anything else.
Exactly.
But the thing about these things is reviewing the stuff. Oh, I was getting some feedback.
Oh.
Sorry, no, that was me.
Okay. Where I was going was, okay, got it now. All of these things are technically Nephandi, but there are variants in them that are fairly important. Infernal Nephandi, I've seen them talked about, but there isn't always the same idea that they've gone through the call as the Malthians and the Kalasha.
No, they are more the type of Nephandi that would have sold their soul to a devil or demon or Satan, if you will.
Which is its own horror.
And in that way have their avatars disfigured.
Mm-hmm. But I think... Oh, go ahead, Peter.
Finish your thought.
The key thing about that is the fact that all Nephandi have, I'd argue, their souls and their avatars disfigured. But I've often argued that Infernalist Nephandi, while awful and horrible, are not as bad as the other two. Simply because of one factor. Infernalist Nephandi is a loss of power to a demon. Like, they aren't just selling their soul. They are selling their soul and their avatar. Their source of magic. Their right to creation and ascension.
Yeah.
The other two have had their avatars deliberately turned against creation itself. Turned against the purpose of the avatar itself. And
The
on one hand...
Widdersland, yeah?
Pardon?
The Widdersland.
Actually, that was the number 4 that I would argue.
Yeah, yeah.
The fourth variety, and I say this because Nephandi that belong to these 3 factions all have a specific ideology that they develop. Winterslant are what happens when a Nephandist dies and the avatar comes back and awakens someone.
And
They start
immediately
off-
in twisted form. They don't go through the call in that incarnation.
No.
They
The
get
variety
born
that
with the inverted soul to begin with.
And these are the kind of people that make the worst psychopathic killers seem like Mr. Rogers.
Yep.
And I feel that they should be treated as a separate group simply because they're not... the term for a converted Nephandis is Barabai. Or at least that's how I pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is, Barabai has gone into the call, eventually, willingly. At some point, they give up.
Right.
When you go into the call, you don't necessarily have to want to go into the call. But when your avatar is changed, you consent to it.
Yeah, that was a conscious decision to turn away, to let it happen.
Yeah.
I believe the Book of Madness talks about how if a person doesn't consent to that, then
It's an
whatever people
agonizing
are in the
death.
calls, just rip them apart. Just
Yeah.
kill
Yep.
them.
Then
And
it's
I mean,
just the end of it.
That's kind of preferable, if you think about it. At least then your avatar doesn't get inverted, and you don't become this monster for the rest of however long.
Oh, it gets worse. In 2 points of lore, one was a game a friend of mine ran, where imagine the idea of an avatar committing suicide over going through that process.
Ooh,
Self-Gilgul.
Oh.
that's interesting.
It was a choice that a spirit master made. Rather than risk falling, he Gilguled himself. Now, Peter, you're most familiar with Sorcerer's Crusade. How about you do Gilgul, since it comes from that era?
Okay, 1 second. Hold that thought. We got our first question of the night.
Oh, please.
Great.
Wants to know Silver Flame wants to know if the Nephandi, if their magic is different from other mages.
We prepared for this.
Yep.
We tried to prepare for this, and we didn't do a very good job, but that's okay.
I think you're too pessimistic.
We tried to know the unknowable, and some of us will probably be going into the calls later tonight.
Going.
So yes, Nephandic magic, once they've gone through the calls, is different. They have access to clipothic spheres, which are like the dark reflections of sphere magic. Now, this is a concept that's hard to understand.
Peter,
but
I actually have a background in religious studies, so would you like me to take that?
jump in.
Okay. A lot of mage players are reasonably familiar with the idea of the Sephiroth, and it's a huge, complex idea, so I'm going to simplify it a remarkable amount. In creation, there are several aspects. If you use the metaphor of a seed that's growing, every seed is contained in a shell. The shell is what gets left behind. If every sphere is a plant that has grown, the quithothic spheres are the shells that are left behind and allowed to rot. How's that?
Not bad.
Thank you.
And those shells then again influence the plant that has grown out of them in order to destroy it again.
Thank you, Thijs.
Good.
Now,
That's interesting. It reminds me a little bit of the relationship between the Kithane and the Thalane. The Kithane are ostensibly, depending on which canon source you look at, the Kithane are born from the dreams of humans and humankind, early humankind, but still. And the Thalane are born from the dreams of things that predate humanity and cosmic beings. They're sort of cosmic existential horror. And you can kind of get into the way that they both approach reality. The Kithane are trying to preserve creativity and to foster it in the world, and the Thalane want a return to the state of being before humanity. so that way they can have a more comfortable environment, basically.
They want their power back.
Yes.
Now, Silver Flame, we were talking about the Klepothic spheres, and we had this discussion a little bit ago that explaining what each level of a Klepothic sphere does that is different from a standard sphere at that level.
How about we go through the spheres, just baseline, so that we can go through them alphabetically from a Klepothic standpoint.
Sure.
Correspondence, also known as space in Awakening. It's the ability to affect distance, connections, resonances between things, connections between things, and manipulating this concept. Kleptothically, you are destroying that.
Klepothic correspondence would somewhat coincide with the principle of doing voodoo.
You connect, you destroy, and
connect with the other person and then do harm instead of
anything else, really.
A healthy working
magic is what you're talking about, Thijs.
Sorry?
You're talking about sympathetic magic?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is one of the cornerstones of Vodun.
And a cornerstone
and Santeria.
Of correspondence.
And for that matter. So then, do you feel like Klepothic correspondence would be destroying that connection? Or do you think Klepothic correspondence would be destroying something and letting that destruction destroy everything else connected to it? Like if you...
Both.
Okay.
Either, really. An example I've used before is, think of a Stargate that takes 2 points and makes them 1. You step into a portal, you walk through the other side. If you tried the same trick using Klepothic correspondence, you aren't actually making 2 points 1. You're destroying everything in between the 2 points.
Okay.
As well as the 2 points.
I'll say, so it's kind of the idea of destroying one gate and expecting it to spread through that gate to destroy the other one as well.
Pretty much.
It's the way I see it, it would be tapping into the wormhole itself.
Right.
And then by means of that wormhole, infecting both gates with a computer virus, so to speak. So they destroy anything matter related on either side.
Which is also how Klepothic matter could work.
Yeah, exactly.
The hardest ones, in my opinion, to understand, anything that deals with corruption or negation of more physical things, like, say, forces, life, matter. I think most people can grok.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pattern,
right? But then you come across the harder ones. Ironically, the more quote-unquote primordial spheres of prime, spirit, and time.
Well, spirit you can still somewhat see as a spirit that gets dissolved, because a spirit still has a form of matter of sorts.
Essence, more or less.
Right.
But the rest, energy getting dissolved, which is already not touchable, that's a concept all on its own.
It is.
I guess
I can kind of see time, if you're talking about inverting the necessity of time. There are a couple of changeling arts that deal specifically with time and the flow of time, and at certain levels of it you can pervert that and invert it, not just in a making time go backwards kind of way, but in a really, really fucking with the nature of reality way. That sounds like a thing that would work in that. It's a art called Kronos.
As expected.
Well, the Nephandi would probably destroy entire timelines of possibility altogether, given
That would make
Klimpothic
sense.
time.
Peter, you were starting something?
My original point is kind of still there in that it's hard to see how any of these things can't be done with the standard level of a sphere.
That's the kicker. Most standard spheres, and it's also part of the reason why Quipothic spheres are an option, but not always taken by Nephandi.
Right.
Standard spheres can reduce things to 0. The key point about Quipothic spheres is that it goes past 0, not just into negatives, but past it into the point where it is a drawing void meant to destroy something. I was going to say, the creepiest thing about Quipothic Prime is that it can be used to corrupt any pattern at all to the point of negation. If you get stabbed with an Quipothic Prime weapon, another in-game example, that is a health level gone. Not just an ag, but blanked out completely.
Yeah, that health level does not exist anymore. That's a good point.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Hold on, since you brought it up. I have made mention on more than one show about magic weaponry. And every time I brought it up, I either got laughed out of my chair or told that storytellers won't let you have them at all. And I brought up mage, okay? And they were like, no right mage storyteller would let you have a magical weapon.
Wow.
Dude, those people that you've talked to have never played Changeling because there's a whole thing in there for treasures.
Well, yeah,
and
they're even among vampires.
Treasures is weapons.
Even among vampire, there's a couple of weapons, like the ivory bow.
Yeah. In my ongoing campaign that crosses through multiple games in the same setting, I've been running for 5 years. We're kind of known as sword breakers because we've had many magical swords and they keep breaking because people keep, botching the attack rolls with them.
Oh dear.
Oops.
That happens.
That's more than an oops.
Sword breaker.
This is a side thing, but in Mage, there are 3 or 4 books just dedicated to magical objects.
Now, see, when it comes to magic items, and I feel like we're kind of getting off track here, but
Let's at least
We tend to tangent.
when it comes
It's
to
okay.
magic items, it's as a storyteller in general, my goal is to tell a good story. So if you just want a magic sword, all right, well, that's not really something I can do for you. But if we're going to tell this story of you and it happens to involve this magic sword, and this magic sword is tied intrinsically to some NPCs or even better, some adversaries, that we can do. Absolutely.
Yeah, don't just magic. Don't try to use magic to solve all your problems and murder hobo your way through everything. But at the same time, a Changeling game we had a troll that collected redcap teeth from all the redcaps he beat the piss out of, and he made a warhammer, and the head of it was studded with redcap teeth, and it did extra damage. It did ag because redcap teeth. And it was specifically enchanted to do that. And because it became a part of his story, it was like, well, I don't have any reason to deny you that, even though it kind of makes me feel ill to think about it. So you got it.
Yeah, but that's an example of the story evolving naturally into the development of that item.
Exactly. That's not you walk to the market and you buy this +2 weapon in Dungeons and Dragons style.
Like I was going to point out was that you can't hand them out like Halloween candy. That's for sure. But the just saying on principle magic weapons are right the hell out. That was what got me up in arms about it. It really did. I was like, okay, guys, come on. I said, I know there are magic weapons in the game. I've heard of a few.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah, there's this whole status predication thing in Werewolf where if you have a clave, that's a really big deal, and that's a big mark of status or something that's been handed down in your family's pedigree. And that's a really, really big deal.
Yeah.
I got a way to tangent it back, and it's actually a really interesting point about mage, and can actually make something. Let's take that Quipothic dagger idea. That is technically a magic item, but is it a permanent magic item? A Nephandi took a dagger, picked one appropriate to their paradigm, and enchanted it to do Quipothic prime aggravated damage. It might not be a permanent enchanted item, also known as a wonder, or if a spirit was used for it, a fetish. But the thing is, there's nothing stopping any mage from enchanting an object. It's just a question of, does it have its own magic, or are you fueling it?
good point.
Mm-hmm.
Very good point.
And of course, the magic weapon will probably dissolve or blow up or do something equally nasty the moment it is used.
To absorb the paradox? Maybe?
Or just because of
Either
its
the
innate
paradox
nature.
or because of it being a Nephandic weapon.
Or because the storyteller felt like it was too powerful and the player shouldn't have it.
Right? You guys don't get to keep this
Oh,
toy.
yeah.
So it blew up in your hand.
But
Enjoy Mr. Free Fingers.
the aforementioned ivory bow, it's a vampiric. I guess it's an artifact, and what it does, it not only does it do aggravated damage. If you shoot a vampire with it, it automatically stakes them.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's vicious, but there's only one, so you got to have a damn good reason to get it.
I think the Tremere have some things like that in some of their books.
Yes,
that are just
we
random
do, but
things
we
that
don't
they
talk
create.
about that.
Silly Tremere using old non-dynamic magic from about 4 centuries ago.
Mm.
Just update yourselves, guys.
Well, I was, when you were talking about Quipothic magic, I was like, okay, so it sounds very similar to quite a few of the paths in thaumaturgy.
Well, here's the thing. Quipothic magic's big. You can use any mage spheres to mimic a path. Not even Quipothic. It's just that Quipothic exists for a very specific purpose that is universal. Destroying reality on one level or another. On one degree or another. Mm-hmm. You can't use Quipothic spheres to create. The best you can do is corrupt.
Oh, okay.
And that's the point of the Nephandi.
Because yes, some of the paths of thaumaturgy actually can be used to create. I'll be one of the first Tremere to go with you on that one. Although, to be honest, my character never. I mean, I had 1 point of thaumaturgy and very rarely ever used it.
The best games are the ones where you really don't have to throw out the magic and stuff. I played a Changeling game that ran for 7 years, twice a week. And other than a couple of really big things that I did that eventually turned me into Dantean, because I did some bad stuff. Other than a couple of really big things that happened, I probably only used magic 20, 30 times in the course of all of that, because I really didn't need to.
To be truthful, Archons don't need a lot of thaumaturgy. But we have another question from Silver Flame, and I'm going to see if I can translate this. In a Nephandi has such warped magic, does going through the call warp the avatar's essence?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a good answer.
Question
So
answer.
we've got about 20 minutes left to do Nephandi, and then we're going to switch up to Marauders for the second half of the show.
Actually, I can literally say what they're tainted to because it's just a page away from the quipothic spheres. Dynamic becomes destruction. Pattern becomes frozen. Primordial becomes chaotic. And the worst one, questing. You know, the popular one, the one that's about ascending and improvement, becomes tormented.
Ooh, none of that sounds fun.
Yeah.
A question I was going to ask my other two fellow mage experts, come storytellers, come madmen who are stuck with me. Have either of you had a player go Nephandus?
I have not.
No, unfortunately not.
I have walked a player down an infernal path, but not Nephandic.
I ask because one of the big uses of Nephandi, from an ST's perspective, I should add, is to offer a genuine option of corruption. Jumping from technocrat, tradition, etc. can be treated as a difference of philosophy. But the slow descent of Nephandus, that's an outright, you become an NPC because very few games
Absolutely.
can handle that shit.
And not very many players can actually handle portraying a Nephandus to the hilt.
And I think that's a good thing.
I'd like to point out also, in the established canon of mage NPCs, Jody Blake was really kind of a bad example of a Nephandi. She was really more infernalist than anything else, and she kept getting her ass whooped by hollow ones.
Well, hollow ones are the best.
I'm actually...
I felt like she was part of that mustache twirly bad guy that's too shallow and one-dimensional that we'd mentioned earlier.
But she's also a legacy character.
Right.
She's been around since the beginning, and when you consider that in particular, Jody hasn't evolved like I'd argue the game line itself has evolved.
True.
Yeah, all the different game lines in their earlier iterations were much more, at least in my viewing of them, their earlier iterations were much more black and white. And these are the good guys and these are the bad guys, and much more tropey. And as they evolved and changed over time and different editions came out, different writers were brought in, over time they became much more nuanced and much creepier.
Yeah, exactly. Before it was the Sabbat consists of the La Sombra and the Tsimisi.
Yeah.
Oh, and some other guys that
And
were
some other
undefined.
guys.
Right.
Well, it's like
aren't-
the Changeling books, when you look at the book that's called The Shadow Court, that isn't at all about the Shadow Court. It's got like a chapter about them, and the rest of it's an Unsteely book that's really not that much different than the 3 other books that they've released for the She. It's like, this is ridiculous, and you guys kind of turn them into mustache twirling villains, and then later they really amped them up and made them really kind of horrifying and subtle and creepy, and they introduced new kinds, and it was great. But those earlier stabs at it are like, what is this, and why did you try to do this?
Now,
And why is it
I
a
have
Shadow
a-
Court to begin with?
I have a question, and this came up after I posted the show. And the 2 places where I post our advertisements outside of our group, and some of the these Klipothic horribleness. Do they have any physical I mean, will they warp the actual physical aspect of that mage? Will it turn them into some really horrible looking stuff? Because that was the impression I got, was that after you're so corrupted into this horribleness, you start losing the way even remotely looking human anymore. Kind of like...
Arguably, yes. I would say they start to look a little like the minions of an Earthbound in Demon the Fallen, where once they get influenced or corrupted with the Earthbound, its hellish powers, their whole body and sense of identity actually gets twisted as well. But I would go with that only for story purposes.
A key thing.
That makes sense. There's sort of that element that plays in some of the other game lines, like in Werewolf, having corruption has very physical effects that
like
not
the Black
only
Spiral
can...
Dancers.
Yeah. Or people who become exposed to, say, balefire in Werewolf's context as opposed to balefire in Changeling's context, which totally is a whole different thing. Yeah. Totally different balefire. But balefire in a werewolf context, in the process of corrupting you, it also twists you. It also burns you because it's fire, but it also twists your body and your soul in the process and mutates you.
Yeah.
In Changeling, if you start getting into, depending on the kind of glamour that you're consuming and what the nature of what inspired that glamorous production, like, for example, if you were musing the xenophobic hate out of somebody by encouraging them to go and kill their Islamic neighbor, which is a thing you can do, or, go attack that nice queer couple or whatever. If you want to muse, which is technically the good way of getting glamour, but muse in a terrible way, the glamour that you get out of that is going to be oily and gross, and you consuming it is going to affect the way that you appear and come off to other fae. They're going to be able to tell the quality of the food you're eating, basically, and where it came from.
The thing that I'd also add is all powerful mages pick up paradox flaws and permanent paradox.
Absolutely.
That is usually based somewhere around what they've done or the magical resonance that is their magical signature. Mm-hmm. Now imagine what those flaws look on a Nephandi. Think
horrible, twisted.
That's a good point.
The Nephandi that don't look horrible and twisted don't have a feeling of that will make you puke up living corpses of frogs. Yes, I know why I said it was contradictory. These are Nephandi. But the ones that do that are the ones that use a lot of magic.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the reason why I've often argued Nephandi don't go out of their way to do big magic. True. Because their resonance is so inimical to reality that they stand out. You paradox a lot as a Nephandi, you will be noticed.
Well, and I'll give her a nod on this one. Jody Blake is at least 500 years old or so, probably older, and she doesn't have anything like that.
Dude, according to lore, Jody Blake might actually be Sumerian.
Yeah, we're not sure. Yep. She was around in the Sorcerer's Crusade era. It says Nephandic lore starts mentioning her around 1450, so hard to tell.
Yep.
But she doesn't have any of those horrible paradox flaws. Either that or she's bargained with the right demons to hide them.
Which
is a good possibility. Yeah. It's always nice to be able to bargain with nasty things to get, some bonuses. My husband played a Bali for a while that it was, yeah, there was a lot of that happening. It was bad.
And of course, you still have to be presentable, so to speak, as a pawn for your master or whatever entity you are working for.
That's true.
To be
They want
able
you to be able
to do your job in the outside world. Because if you're this twisted, pestilent bucket of slime, so to speak, that only resembles a human, you are not going to be taken serious, mostly.
Yeah, go to the supermarket, is what I'm hearing.
It's a lot harder to be subtle when you have, 15 vestigial limbs, eyes that scream, and everywhere you go, milk is soured, and I don't know what's another good one. Oh yeah, plants die.
There's a thing in Changeling, trying to remember what it's called. It's actually a flaw. Echoes.
We have echoes in Mage as well.
Yeah.
We have echoes.
Yeah, Changeling deals with that, and their echoes are Fey lore specific, and depending on the level that you take it at, the more intense it becomes. But that becomes kind of problematic when you're having to conceal your nature from reality. Conceal, don't feel, from reality.
Sarah?
In that fashion.
I just remembered something that I wanted to bring up. Actually related to Witherslate, which is, in my opinion, one of the most horrible villains you can throw at someone. Something I just remembered. Witherslate awaken really early, as in children.
Yes, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Mages, as a general rule, don't awaken pre-puberty.
Most of the games don't deal with children in that fashion, other than Changeling. Werewolf does some, Vampire does if you want to be real creepy. Changeling deals with kids, though.
But this is where it gets worse. You ever hear the expression, murderous like a child?
No.
Mm-hmm.
The idea being that at a certain age, children don't have the same grasp over what they're doing as an adult would.
They don't understand ethics and morality in the same way that adults do. Because they don't understand the gravity of their actions.
So
before age 7, so to speak.
So take a Nephandis who's awakened, a Winterslate, a child, and give them the power to corrupt, to murder, to kill, to destroy, and throw this at your players.
I would say you have yourself a regular Damien from the Omen movies.
Yeah, I was about to say that sounds about there. Or there was a movie that came out a very, very long time ago called The Bad Seed.
Don't even go very, very long time ago.
I think it was The Good Son.
Well, no, there was the original Bad Seed that came out when my mother was a kid.
Oh, okay.
I think they did a remake with Macaulay Culkin when I was
did.
a teenager or so. The original movie was it featured a little girl, and she murdered. It was in an apartment building. The whole thing was set in an apartment, and she ended up murdering several of their neighbors and the landlord, and finally her mother at the end.
And what if that's your villain? You have to murder a child. There is no fixing them. They will continue to do this non-stop.
It's sociopathy.
Yeah. Changeling kind of does this too if you end up finding like a childling Thalane, because that's a thing.
Yeah. By the way, just sidetrack real quick, sorry. Into the Wilderness points out that fetches have echoes too.
Yes, they do. Fetches have echoes if you're dealing with that whole thing.
But continue, sorry.
The key point I'm trying to make here is the point of the Winterslate, the point of the Nephandi as a whole is to show a black mirror of humanity. in Mage. The fact that we have these self-destructive and period-destructive urges as part of our makeup, and you are dealing with something that will make the experience of dealing with it traumatic. You have to murder a child. You have to go after someone charismatic and well-liked. You have to go after someone that has tried to basically seed a magical cancer, regardless of its form, not just biological, everywhere it goes. There's no redemption. There is no possibility of making things better. And there's no way you can deal with them except possibly by destroying their avatar. And that's possibly. Not every Gilgul takes.
I'll say, then you have the distinction of having done Gilgul on a child. That's rough.
Yeah.
That's the point. And I'd argue that's arguably why Nephandi are described as the worst, the baddest, the most evil villains.
The worst of the worst, yes.
Because fundamentally, it's not just what they do, it's what they make your players do.
True.
Very good point.
None of that sounds fun.
The whole thing in early Mage, the story with Amanda, whatever her name was, it was Senex's new apprentice, was he went right to her as soon as she awakened because he wanted to keep her close and make sure that she didn't flip. He wanted to make sure she wasn't Witherslain because he had killed her predecessor, Avatar bearer, Mercedes something or other, Mercy something or other.
Mm-hmm.
And fundamentally, that is still a hope in Mage. That part of the point of Mage is that anything is hypothetically possible. But the point of the Nephandi is it goes both ways. The book Ascension contains a what if the Nephandi win scenario. I read it specifically for this.
Yeah. That was good. That's good stuff.
And the key point of it is, even if the Nephandi win, and trust me, it's worth a read to understand what that means, even though I don't wholly agree with how they interpreted it, there is still the possibility of turning it around in the long game.
True.
Okay, we're coming up on our first hour. I'm throwing it back open to the folks in the chat. If you've got more questions, please don't hesitate. Ask away. We will do our best to answer them. Sounds like these three guys know what they're talking about, so you'll get a well, how should I put this? You will get a very complete answer.
An attempt at a somewhat intelligible response?
Yeah. So we're now going to switch over to Marauders for the second half of this, since we kind of went with the first half of the show as being all about the Nephandi. So we're going to discuss the other weird mages. These guys I actually know a little bit about these guys.
These guys are crazy.
This is kind of like the mage version of the Malkavians.
Malkavians wish.
Sort of, but not at all. I mean, I was having this discussion earlier, and I feel like the difference is that the Malkavians are what they are, and they can still function within society, whereas Marauders are walking trauma. Marauders are some of the most tragic characters in the setting for me.
Tragic?
It reminds me, from what I'm aware of the Marauders, it reminds me very much of what happens with changelings who are deeply lost to Bedlam. That it basically gets to a point where they lose touch with consensual reality to such a degree that they start forming their own reality around them, and then in Changeling, Bedlam is contagious. So
The same goes for Marauders.
yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure whether or not that was the case. In Changeling, Bedlam is contagious, and so not only are you forming your own little pocket reality is conforming to you within the dreaming and dreaming spaces, but you're infecting other people around you with your madness, and that's bad news. In Changeling terms, it means you get hunted and put down.
Thijs, do you want to try explain to the audience what quiet is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's
Quiet, yeah. Once you used too much magic that resulted in paradox. This paradox messes with your way of seeing reality, so that you start to see things that aren't there, and you even start to interact with them, kind of the crazy person starting to babble against things that and people that aren't there or have already died or whatever. But then actually can draw other people into that illusion of where they are, their place in reality. That's how I usually interpret this quiet.
Now, one of the cool paragraphs here, and this got brought up during one of our other mage shows as a tangent. This is the external quiet of a marauder protects them from paradox. Their alternate reality supports their paradigm, so the vulgar magic they use doesn't violate the rules of that reality.
to a degree.
But yeah, it also says that any paradox that they do it tends to be sent after any other awakened beings outside of that bubble.
Yep. That's where they become antagonists, because to use a current kind of example, if you think of that movie with The Rock that's out right now, Rampage, it's kind of like that, where you have these people running around the city destroying things in their wake, and they don't mean to, and they don't really know what they're doing. They're just kind of lashing out, but you have to stop them, or their very presence will destroy everyone around them.
That movie is based on a video game, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. But it kind of works.
It does. I haven't gotten a chance to see it yet because I keep rewatching Ready Player One. I am in love with that story. I truly am. So, that's also something that mages pop up. Two of the main characters are technically mages. Mm-hmm. Anorak the All-Knowing and the Great and Powerful Og. And they talk about during the story where some zones magic works, some zones technology works, and in there some zones where both. So you get the Oasis being a very magical realm, essentially, which I kind of think is very hip.
It's Horizon.
You're talking about Zero Dawn?
Nope.
No, Mage Horizon.
Oh.
It's
the tradition stronghold
realm that they used, where everybody's magic all worked there at the same time, even if it was technology. It all still worked there. It got destroyed though. So, Oh well.
as per usual.
Yeah. Jerks.
I don't know. I think they usually, White Wolf in general, has half the crew writing new stuff and has the other half go figuring out how to destroy it.
Makes sense. Half of them
About
are,
accurate.
Yeah.
half of them are mages and half of them are Nephandi.
Sounds about right.
I mean, how many people did they have working on the Gehenna Chronicles and the other end of the world scenarios that they did for that now apparently aren't freaking canon?
Right.
That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
We don't want to get into that.
You don't want me involved in a time of judgment conversation.
Come on.
I would be pleasant. Let's not do that.
3 shows later.
Yes, no, actually, we do have a show coming up. Hold on, I have to pull up my outline. We have, that's Knights of Prophecy on September 4th.
Yeah, we do have it scheduled and stuff, and I'm kind of looking forward to hearing about that because everything I have to say about it is really unflattering. So,
Ooh, wow!
Who did we get for that? Have we gotten anybody yet?
We have. I'd have to look at my notes though.
Don't stress it. We'll worry about this later. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, she has put a lot of effort into these next few shows. So if you get a chance, and thank her. I mean, come on, show some love.
Thank you. I'm glad to help. Of course.
You saved my life here, man. You really did. Because I don't think I could do this thing by myself. I just don't think I can. And thank goodness for Dan and Adam, who are going to be taking over the next few shows, alternating. So
wait, what?
Not you, Dan. Dan Carrion.
Okay, thank God. I thought I agreed to something again.
No, unless you want to get in on as a co-host, you're more than welcome to, dude. I bet I can talk into one of them.
That'll be a negotiation later.
Huh? Okay, all right. And I'm more than happy to have any of our past guests come on as a guest co-host for the next shows that we don't already have co-hosts for. So yeah, because we still don't know how long Brother Jacob's going to be missing in action, but IRL, you got to do what you got to do.
Hear that?
So, speaking to Marauders as tragic antagonists, I feel like it's a little more difficult to tell that story and portray them as an antagonist in the forefront. Have any of you had any experience running a Marauder as a main antagonist?
Here's a bit of the problem I find. I've tried.
Uh-huh.
Part of the issue with the tragedy of a Marauder is that the players have to figure out where the tragedy comes from. And so often, the nature of a Marauder doesn't actually make it easy to figure out.
Granted.
Yeah.
I think that depends on what kind of hints you drop as the ST. Because I've done tragic villains before that weren't immediately obvious why they were tragic, and it's just kind of...
How many of them had the ability... I mean, here's an example. In Mage, one of the big legacy characters that they, I'd argue, amusingly killed off, Porthos, was an Archmage who had an unbelievably powerful quiet that probably existed for the last century. That was along the lines of, he believed his wife and child were still alive. They'd been dead for centuries and were killed rather tragically, if I remember correctly. The key thing is, a Marauder is just as dangerous for a very different reason. An Archmage in quiet can be suffering a form of dementia and is powerful enough to do what an Archmage can do. A Marauder, however, what they believe is so powerful, it is warping reality itself in a little bubble around them. You were talking about zones earlier. Imagine a character who brings the zone with them wherever they go. And not all of them are especially benign to human life.
True.
In Changeling, the analog for that is the Dauntain. Because in their instance, they don't affect mundane reality in that fashion, but in chimerical reality and in the dreaming, that is exactly what they do.
Except from an in-universe cosmological perspective, what Marauders are is dynamism gone wild. And excuse the pun. It is that creative process gaining so much forward momentum that anything becomes possible, to the point where their delusions become possible. And an example of one of the books is, imagine you're jogging down a block and there's a marauder in a building. The person is jogging, they aren't awoken. When they enter the bubble, they become a Greek hoplite. The building becomes a Grecian-style plaza. And that person walks around. Their mind has changed. Their clothing has changed. Their attitudes have changed. Their knowledge of the world around them have changed. And when they exit the bubble, everything is back to what they recognize, and they have not seen the difference.
Yeah, you can get into that in Changeling. If you start talking about people that are in severe bedlam, or you start talking about Dauntain that have Dauntain arts specifically that warp the nature of chimerical reality or destroy it on contact, and warp other chimerical creatures, including the Fae's, perceptions of chimerical reality. And considering that the Changeling populace perceives chimerical reality and mundane reality simultaneously, that really screws with them. But yeah, there are analogs to that, not per se on a let's manipulate mundane reality scale, but Changeling does that too. It's scary.
The key thing here is that awoken people will notice these things.
True.
The movie Sucker Punch was, in my opinion, a great movie talking about marauders.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Right up to the last 5 seconds.
Yeah.
What 5 seconds?
No, the last 5 seconds of the movie with the dink.
Quiet. I have quiet. I don't believe that exists.
I think I saw it in the theater once and didn't care for it, if we're being honest. I don't like Zack Snyder.
Oh, okay. Oddly enough, I'm finding that men seem to enjoy that movie more than women. And I don't know exactly why, other than the aforementioned Zack Snyder issue.
I intensely dislike Zack Snyder.
Hot girls jumping around with.
Okay, but that goes off topic.
But
Yeah.
The point was more that she sees the madhouse as an ornate, high-class brothel where they are forced to work and dance, where in reality it is a madhouse.
And it kind of also adds to a very, very, another tragic and horrifying point about marauders, that marauder quiets can merge.
It's called a fusion.
Yep.
It's the fact that if they have mutually workable enough quiets, they will start to merge and develop cabals around these things. In
This
the
is
books,
something that
For
I wanted
instance,
to talk
the
about.
Umbrella Underground.
Exactly.
and
That's what I was about to bring up. Go ahead, Dan.
no, keep going, because if you're going to bring up the same thing that I'm going to bring up, I've spoken a lot already. Go for it.
I was definitely going to mention the Umbrella Underground and how that is a good way to represent the Marauders as antagonists in a slightly more coherent and organized fashion. They have come a long way in developing that from what it was in first edition and second edition, in that they used to be very cartoony. And now they're a little bit more. They're portrayed as a little bit more dangerous
Nuanced.
and nuanced. Yes. Go ahead.
A thing I was going to bring up, two of the things that I found really interesting about the Underground. One, it's run by a marauder who is experiencing quiet, but the quiet they're experiencing leaves them relatively functional.
You're talking about Robert Davenport?
Dr. Robin Davenport, yes. I have you. But
he didn't go to 8 years of evil medical school just to be called Mr.
Go for it.
He's a very scary individual, and I guess the concerning thing about that is that we don't really know what his goals are. But we know that he's the most organized of all of the members of the Underground, and he has worked some of the people that are close to him, some of the Marauders that are close to him, he has worked them into a point where they can influence other Marauder cabals to help whatever end goal he has in mind.
And to be perfectly honest, he is a classic example of the technocrat paradigm biting them in the ass. Because it's the plain fact that part of the reason why he was on the verge of awakening, and he was basically given hey, come join us, become a technocrat. He said, not really interested. And they thought, well, this guy could be a problem. Let's just arrange a car accident. And then he became a Marvel superhero.
Yeah, that's kind of what I got when I read his backstory. I was like, okay.
So, okay, how about these guys sound interesting. The Kawith HaKadesh?
Yep. They actually have a Ready Player One example that I think is freaking hilariously awful.
I was thinking about that when I first heard of Ready Player One. I was like, that sounds like
yeah.
Okay, sure. Running around.
Yep. Think about a bunch of people playing, I don't know, say Destiny, for example, a big PvE server with lots of complexity, plenty of weapons, and a strong desire for completionism, because this team of very violent marauders has a really awful habit of leaving no survivors, ever. Because they think they're in a game.
Huh.
So they go into a place and they think they're playing the best VR game ever. Every time they're shooting one of the enemies and killing them off, it's just more points. They think they are stuck in that game, and they haven't thought about the fact they haven't gone out in years. That's part of their quiet.
It's very...
That's a very
Ender's
good
Game.
example of a Marauder, yeah.
It's very Ender's Game.
Oh, yeah. And
very much so, yeah.
So, who wants to have a fun time explaining cryptozooterrorism? Because, to me, that is one of the more slapsticky Marauder things, but it is a really good example on why they are bad for reality.
But you're street regulars.
Okay, let's say that you want to really screw over a bunch of mages. You go over in your quiet, and let's say a griffin appears. Except you willingly made sure that griffin appears. It wasn't just a griffin is part of your reality. You made that griffin happen. And then you get the hell out. In summoning that thing and creating it, you have given all that paradox to the closest awakens around.
I was going to say, it's like setting off a bomb. It's like setting off a paradox bomb to any nearby mages that are not in quiet, that are not Marauders.
And it gets worse. Because as soon as you book it, that thing stays there.
Yep.
And all that paradox you would be taking keeps bouncing off you to a degree. Marauders do receive paradox, it's just they have a filter that is their quiet. It's basically, the more quiet you are, the less paradox affects you. But the downside is, those mages now have to deal with an enraged griffin that isn't enjoying itself, that is suffering paradox itself, and thus have to use paradoxical methods to get rid of it.
Back to the rampage.
Yep.
Look, there's giant monsters.
Yep.
And
Give
so
me just
in
a second. I have to step away a moment.
Okay.
in this scenario, the giant monsters are rampaging because they don't want to exist. And every moment they exist is throwing paradox all over the place. And your special team of mage NPCs are the only ones that can stop them from existing. But you're getting hit with paradox every moment while you're trying to deal with the problem and save lives like a Marvel superhero.
And this is the reason why Marauders are on the shoot-on-sight list.
Absolutely.
And it's also the tragedy because the Nephandi knows that what the fuck he's doing is awful. He just doesn't care.
He just doesn't care, yeah.
The Marauder doesn't.
Right.
Most of them are
Marauder
lucid.
thinks they are doing what they're doing just because they are doing it, and because it fits their image of reality, and the Nephandis are actually thinking, hey, I'm going to do something evil today.
Right.
Gonna kick a puppy and, well, just pencil in some stuff.
Okay, sorry about that.
Welcome back.
No worries. And I think that's an important thing to realize about the Marauder that, I mean, I hate to do this because this is kind of a throwback to the last time I was on, but I think comparing them to Malkavians is actually a really important point to make. I've always held that Malkavians aren't clinically insane. They are insane, but not by any medical understanding of the word. They either are broken by reality, or they are seeing an aspect of reality that no one else can.
Yeah,
depending
legend
on the
has it the
interpretation.
reason they are crazy is because they know too much.
Yep. Now, consider the Marauder instead, who has all the power and ability to handle that know too much. But they're kind of quiet. Their inability happens because they are overreaching in their power, and rather than accepting that to a degree, they enter a delusion. A clear, I hate to do it because I just said avoid medical things, but it's a really important thing to remember. The difference between a delusion and a hallucination is belief. You believe in a delusion. A hallucination you do not necessarily have to believe in. You can be aware you are hallucinating. You are not aware you're under a delusion.
Yeah, okay.
Good
So,
point.
Yeah, that is an important distinction to make, for sure.
because, psychedelics in general, ayahuasca and various other ones, what you're seeing most of the time is all in your head. You have a disconnect there. You know that this is not really happening, so we're cool. But a delusion, on the other hand, yeah, that's you're talking to your mother, even though she's been dead for 1,000 years.
You know that the CIA is out to get you, implant things into your brain, and is out to get you and your family. For the Marauder, the CIA is actually the NWO.
Mm-hmm.
It's that horrible point that they are either interpreting reality or they are denying reality. A Marauder can deny reality to the point where certain things won't affect them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are 3 kinds of quiet in the Mage 20 book, and if you guys don't mind, I'm just going to pull them up.
Go for it.
Denial, which used to be called clarity, and thank God they changed that because that was a confusing point for many, where you are denying an aspect of reality. So it can be a question of projection, it can be hypocritical behavior, it can be fanaticism. But the key point of it is you're denying something is there. A good example is Davenport's denial that his wife and child are dead. They died. That was a key point of what drove him Marauder.
True.
But the key point that makes him functional is that his quiet is that they are alive. The second kind is madness. This is the stuff that most mage people will recognize as being classic Marauder. These are the people who think they are superheroes. These are the people who warp the reality around them because it is a way to match their beliefs on what is going on. This isn't something isn't. This is I am adding to things. And then you get the third kind of quiet, which anyone who's a fan of the Euthanatoi will know all too well. Formerly called Jor, called in Mage 20 morbidity. That's where the nihilism comes in. That's where the more actual morbidity comes in. And the funny and horrifying thing is, a Marauder can have all of these.
And they will actually argue for it and fight for it.
Wow. No wonder they're crazy.
Oh yeah, but here's the kicker. Any mage can have quiet and not be a Marauder.
Porthos.
Porthos. I'd argue most of House Helenkar.
That's true.
Just for morbidity and Jor, and I'd also argue a lot of technocrats probably experience a degree of denial. But the key point,
that makes sense because the way the denial is described is essentially one of the more popular ways that banality is presented. And as far as Changeling is concerned, technocrats are banal. So that would make sense. There's a whole subclass of villain in Changeling called the Autumn People that sort of handily fit into that. People that so vehemently deny your reality that they can actually hurt you with it.
But the key thing about a Marauder is that they will never get better. Any mage can experience quiet. But the point is that it's something recoverable with effort. Yours or your Cabal mates or Mage Society as a whole. Quiet is in some ways its own version of paradox backlashing on you.
Also one of the ways that established mages become Marauders.
Yeah.
Too many experiments with vulgar magic and too many paradox backlashes result in them falling into quiet.
That makes sense. That's interesting.
Now,
If you push too far, then your ability to understand how you're affecting everything is taken from you.
Now, anybody like to talk about what happens when Marauders get too much quiet? Because it is interesting.
Step up.
I mean, they
Thijs
basically fall into a paradox realm, don't they?
No, I think it's worse. Here's the kicker. Their bubble of reality gets stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger to the point that consensual reality itself kicks them out into the Umbra.
Oh yeah, that was it, yeah.
And that's the thing that I find interesting about it, that is why Marauders are oh so very mage. Marauders still have awakened will to change reality. And eventually a lot of archmages leave for the Umbra because you hit a point where consensual reality is too much.
Does not agree anymore whatsoever to your way of seeing the world and how you want it to be.
That makes sense.
What I find fascinating about Marauders is the fact that they can also be kicked out of the Umbra. There is a point where if a Marauder goes far enough, all of reality says, okay, too much, you're out.
Yeah. Everybody out of the pool.
Yep. And there's a thing I occasionally brought up that came from a Darker Days podcast that has stuck with me. The idea of dissension as another form of ascension. It's a way of getting out of reality to where it's just your avatar in existence. And from that perspective, a Marauder is ascending through their quiet. They are out of the universe. They are out of reality. They have not ascended as other things have. I'd argue it's not even close to what it would like to actually ascend as a mage. But for all functional purpose, they have. They aren't in reality anymore. They have created such a powerful reality of their own. They're out. They're gone.
Yes, because there still has to always be a certain overlap with the reality around them. And when that difference gets too big, then that part of reality separates into its own timeline, as it were. Its own dimension, probably a better word.
Both work.
Yeah. Okay, into the wilderness. Got to meet the dress code for the Umbra. If you don't, you got to go.
I just think about consider the Umbra and what it means to be kicked out.
Well, where do you get kicked out to? That's the question.
Out of reality.
Okay, so into the primordial chaos, I guess?
Well,
Some might argue.
actually, reality grows just that little bit more with this small Marauder pocket realm, as it were, connecting at one point, or, well, there's always
tenuous
one
Yeah.
small
It's a
little
quarantine.
tether that connects to the Marauder, because he or she as a human is still connected to reality, even vaguely.
Well, yeah, I guess their avatar is still holding them for the most part. But
That's the question.
yeah.
It's interesting.
And the fact they have a human body, one would argue.
Some Marauders go beyond that, though. And in some ways, that's kind of where modern Marauders are going. And by modern, I mean in the latest book. There's an example of a Marauder that looks like Guillermo del Toro came up with. All credit goes to the writer when I say that.
Oh, are we talking about Pillory?
Yeah.
Oh, Pillory. Oh, jeez. That thing's nightmare given form.
And that's the point.
Yeah.
You talking about kind of like the angel in Hellboy 2?
Kinda, sorta. It looks like a little girl, or like a young teen girl with 4 arms.
One of which is a lantern.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty creepy visual. I was looking at it earlier in the Art of Mage 20.
Actually, that's a better place to look for it than in the core book itself, although I'm going to see if I can track it down.
The Art of Mage 20 is on page 97. It looks like a woman with 4 arms in a dress. One of the arms is tentacles. One of the arms is a lantern type thing. It has a mouth and no rest of its face. And I think, if I remember correctly, it kind of floats instead of walking.
What part of that's not creepy? I mean, seriously, that's that's nightmare fuel.
End of the point.
So I
And-
guess that there are more of a disfigurement.
I'd say that was probably one that suffered from some paradox backlashes that resulted in altered appearance before sinking into quiet.
So, like we were talking about with the Nephandi, using their corruption stuff, and we had established that there is some physiological changes from the use of this thing. It sounds like the Marauders are worse, as far as that's
Can be.
concerned. Their shit just completely, and I've seen some odd-looking war ghouls, my man. The Simi-Shay know how to do creepy. But this sounds like even they have a lesson to learn.
Well, the key point is, in Marauders are the definition of unpredictability because of this aspect of them. An example is the Men of Gotham, which are just a bunch of marauders that believe they exist in a pulp serial hero reality, and where part of their quiet is that, oh, I always look cool and I never look silly, and there's always a shadow or a steam vent or something for me to hide in.
True.
New Wave, I think he's actually got a physical copy, so linking it's probably not going to work. She wanted to see what you guys were seeing and or describing. I don't know because
Yeah, I can try and find a picture right quick.
okay. I think she'd appreciate that.
It is really hard to describe, so credit to the artist for that.
Absolutely.
To be truthful, man, White Wolf seems to know how to get the art. They know what works and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. They have some really, really good artists. That's one thing, that's for sure.
I'm rather fond of Leaf Jones myself.
Oh, Leaf Jones.
I've been trying to get him on the show for a while too, but he's never played Vampire. He's never played any of the White Wolf games. He just doesn't, And
It's
I guess,
a job.
Huh?
It's a job.
Yeah. He's actually a for real, straight up I sell my art artist. So but he does such good work. He really does. Some of those vampires he did are just awesome. So, all right. Let's see where we are. We got about 20 minutes left here in the show.
I was going to ask if the Peanut Gallery had any Marauder questions.
Yes, I was just going to do that, but you just beat me to it. So, all right, guys, if you have questions, please hook us up. We've got 20 minutes left to kill, and we'll even answer Nephandi questions if you've still got them, too. I don't think any of these guys would. It would really not put them out too much.
And reveal my secrets?
All right.
No.
By the way, we were one viewer away from our record just now. I'm actually super surprised.
That's cool.
Huh?
That makes me feel happy.
Yes, me too. Because our record is 12. So, I guess we were one person away from tying the record, which is great. And I don't have the stats, but I want to say that it was a Mage show that had the record so far.
What can I say? It's Mage.
It gets a lot of love. It really does. And there's other splats that. Here we go. Is Bill Cipher a Marauder?
That's a fair question.
I think I might know who did that. I'll get you soon, I promise. But I'd argue no. If anything, Bill Cipher is, by definition, an incredibly powerful Umbrood.
I was going to say. I mean, at best, a paradox spirit, maybe.
When we've used Bill or a creature that was inspired by Bill in White Wolf, we actually had him as an extremely powerful Nightmare Chimera. Because they can do some next level shit like that. That's what we did with him anyway. When we used him as sort of a basic template to jump off of.
Okay, Donnie, oddly enough, he's been on the show on more than one occasion. He wants to know, can a Marauder be redeemed or a Wittersland? And by the way, you got that spelling right.
I would say a Wittersland eventually could.
I would say that it's probably possible to redeem a Marauder, but I don't know that anybody would survive long enough to succeed at it, unless the quiet were really low. Like the Book of Mendes talks about Davenport being he's a quiet at level 2, and he's almost self-aware, like he almost understands that
he's functional, is right. How I like to think of him.
But I don't know. I kind of feel like that. Self-awareness would be unattainable. Now that I think about it.
I mean, there's a kicker about getting out of quiet. You need to stop doing magic for a while, enough for the paradox to gently burn off, as opposed to exploding. And I know that it's an idea for a chronicle to try, and one of the Cabal's masters went deep into quiet and gone to Marauder. The Cabal's trying to rescue this mage because they love and care about them. It's entirely doable. The trick is figuring out how. And as for... There's a bit of lore that I absolutely adore in the Lost Paths book, because the Alibatin hate Nephandi.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the example brought up is that because the Alibatin use labyrinths as a foci, some of them have come out of the call unchanged. Some. This is not a common thing by any stretch of the imagination. But the argument I've always put forward is, in the same way, in Mage, anything is possible. The question is how, and how much power it takes to pull it off.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, we've got another one from Sieg. He wants to know, or she wants to know about some of the Marauders you guys have used in your games. Any interesting ones or funny ones or?
Oh me, oh my!
I can't feel funny though. You know, it just doesn't work.
I was going to say that doesn't really feel like a thing you can make it as a funny thing, unless your entire game premise is that it's funny.
Well,
the reason he says funny also, I'll point out, is that Marauders in first edition and going into second edition were very comic relief type mages, where they would be walking down the street talking to their buddy and their buddy's zebra on two legs and things like that. And it was very kind of cartoony, wacky, zany stuff. They developed into something more tragic and kind of scary and nuanced, but in the beginning, that was how they were used, which is really unfortunate. I mean, it kind of...
So the mage version of Fish Mouths.
Yes, but originally they were portrayed that way, and that was the problem.
I think
Yes.
all the game lines have a problem with that at some point in their origin. Like we were talking about a little while ago, all of the game lines start with these really broad, really tropey, sometimes a little silly or funny, intentionally or unintentionally, elements that really were served better when they were made a little bit more nuanced over time and made a little darker.
I do have one example that I am not afraid to give out because the group I ran it for did not get the reference. How many of you know Peter Sellers' Clouseau?
Oh, God, yes.
Imagine him as a marauder.
The Pink Panther.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
A person who basically has functional physical invincibility.
Oh, that's good. I like
But it's not because they are invincible, it's because their surroundings and people receive the collateral damage for them.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New Wave has a question here. She'd like to know if there are any crossover interactions between the Nephandi and Marauders with either the Bali or the Earthbound. And I'm laughing at Bali right now.
A kicker is that arguably Infernal Nephandi deal potentially with Earthbound.
That's true.
The Bali, however, I mean, I gotta say, if you're an Infernal Nephandus, you look at Bali and go, I could kill you so easily. It would just be so easy. Why should I bother?
Oh, and I missed it. My bad. Donnie wants to know how you would redeem a Marauder or a Witherslant.
I would say that you redeem a Marauder by making them aware of their own delusion. So make the delusion a hallucination instead. That way they become closer to reality, consensual reality, and they might eventually snap out of it.
I also think Dan mentioned earlier reducing the quiet and reducing the inherent paradox means not using magic. And so if you could find a way to seal them off from their access to their sphere magic, then you could theoretically work on some treatments. It's just you would have to isolate them first.
What about antipsychotic medication? Would that help?
Depends on their quiet.
True.
So the medication.
If you can get it into their reality as something that the Marauder would take.
Gotcha.
So you would have to disguise it as, say, this Marauder thinks he is God in France, literally. You would have to slip it into his wine or have the wine actually be the antipsychotic drugs.
Can't just wrap it in cheese like you do with dog stuff.
Yeah.
Depends on the Marauder. Some Marauders might be dogs.
That would be another possibility, yes, cheese.
All right. See, well, of course, I know that sounded like a completely facetious answer, but I'm just trying to help.
As for the Witherslant, I would say they are, in fact, redeemable, because they are a second incarnation or a third incarnation of the original Nephandus. And this avatar could possibly, over time, change back into one that would go for ascension instead of descension. There's
a point that has to be made when we talk about Gilgul, in the sense you aren't actually killing the avatar, you're removing the avatar from consensual reality. And there has been talk, theoretical in the lore, that the rite of Gilgul and the right means of performing Gilgal has a chance of getting the avatar to reset itself. You might not be able to redeem a Nephandis, but you might be able to redeem the avatar.
I think avatars can definitely be redeemed. Because, well, if you look at it from a karmic point of view, then a person that does the Gilgul on somebody thereby incurs a humongous amount of karmic debt towards that other avatar.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there's one last method, but it's never been addressed in game, and this has been purely a theoretical thing that I've come up with fellow mage geeks. It is hypothetically possible, because everything is hypothetically possible, to create a reverse call.
Oh yeah, I can see how that would work, yeah.
It's never been addressed in any book I've ever seen. And I've
It's
dug.
sort of a white hole idea.
Yeah.
I kind of, you know the morality play that happens when a wraith goes through their harrowing?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like that, where the point of it isn't to drive them further into oblivion. The point is to build them up, to give them back their sense of compassion, their sense of possibility, their sense that things can actually be made better, because fundamentally the point of the Nephandis is they are purely nihilistic.
Yeah.
They have no hope. If you can give a Nephandis hope for the future, arguably you have already begun the redemption.
Makes complete sense, yes.
I will be.
Hope-
I would be
hope
remiss if
being
I
the
did not
first
mention
step.
That, the Book of Madness says in a little side box on page 31 that Witherslain cannot be redeemed by anything short of an oracle or archmaster, and maybe not by them, but there's always another sucker willing to try redeeming them.
Oh.
This is what I was talking about earlier about playing on the weaknesses of those around you and saying, "Oh, if only I had somebody take a chance on me to show me the right way, show me the right thing to do." Witherslains are the ones who like doing that, just so that they can
Show me how to be a good person.
right, and then screw with you over and over and over, and hopefully
And
they go mad.
I'd also add the only example that, aside from Theora Hattrick,
Right.
Who might not have gone Nephandis, but definitely came really bloody close. Amanda, the key thing there is Senex was an Archmaster,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
also a Master of Entropy.
True.
So I'd argue if anyone might be able to pull it off, it'd have been him.
Okay. So we got about 6 more minutes. This is where we usually just kind of decompress and talk about random stuff at this point. I want to thank you guys for coming on the show. You guys are
thank
wonderful.
you, everybody.
I'm
this has
thanking
been fun.
my co-host. Thank you very much. You were really a lifesaver, and I appreciate it. And I want it down immortal, so, because once this thing goes to archive, I'm probably never going to delete it. So, so yes. And I want to thank everybody in the chat, man. You guys really came through with some really cool questions. We appreciate that. So, wait a minute. There was something I was going to bring up tonight. Damn. Hold on.
Okay, you got 6 minutes to do so.
Yeah, hang on. There was supposed to be a new, okay. Nope, that wasn't it either. Never mind.
It'll come to you
As
late
soon as we go off the air.
Exactly.
That's the way this works. Oh, Good Omens. That was one of the things I wanted to. Do you honestly think that I guess you're familiar with the Terry Pratchett
Yes.
Yeah.
story? There's a lot of magic in that.
True.
Where would you put some of this? And I'll be honest, there's a lot of shows of late, like The Librarians and The Magicians, although that got canceled, I think. But I'm also...
Lucifer?
Go ahead.
No, Lucifer.
Oh, Lucifer.
The show.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. Amazing.
Because technically he's not a fallen, but
Well,
there's some interesting stuff going on there. And I am super tickled that they picked it up for the 4th season for Netflix. Because I am in love with that show.
understandable.
I really like the comic series that they're basing it off of. I haven't really seen much of the show. It's one of those I want to sit down and watch. But the comic that it's based on is excellent.
That's
So-
Neil Gaiman.
It is.
Yep. And interestingly, it's one of these cases where Good Omens was done both by Pratchett and Gaiman.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And
True.
if I were to honestly put Good Omens anywhere, I would honestly say it is a Fallen and Mage crossover.
That could be fun. I may even be willing to play that one.
It's one of these things where a friend of mine who is basically a living virtual adept said, if you think about the universe as a system, mages are hackers, Fallen are former sysadmins that still have the passwords.
Ah, okay.
Oh, that's a beautiful reference. Yes.
It is. That's awesome. I'm just.
And-
There was one other one that popped into my head a minute ago. Harry Potter. Of
Yes.
course. I mean, that's just. But they don't seem to have a problem with paradox, which seems to be the kind of thing you'd have to worry about. But they have the memory charms that, keep muggles from realizing magic actually exists.
The sadistic part of me wants to say it's not mage, it's changeling.
I was gonna say Harry Potter is actually much more changeling and they're interacting within the near dreaming or freeholds, and that's why they're not experiencing repercussions, and that's why they can't do it in front of normies. That has been more how I've interpreted the Harry Potter universe, is that it's changeling.
Okay, side tangent real quick. Sabrina, not a chance in hell. I'm sorry, but I'm done with WoW. I'm not mad at you. I just am not interested. I'm done.
Oh, I see. Drawing a line in the sand. Good call.
I just no. I mean, Blizzard's whole method
I'm not
for
an
making
MMO
money
player,
irritates
so.
me.
Yeah, nor am I.
I will say,
Single player experiences all day long, but no MMOs.
if you're looking for a World of Darkness experience that is fascinating, I would say check out The Secret World.
I saw the trailers for that, and I never got to play it.
Me either.
It is grindtastic, but it is so well told as a story.
We've had a couple of good vampire games. One coming out and one that just was released.
Vampire,
Yeah.
the new one.
Yeah, the one with the Y
Excellent.
spelling.
Yeah, it's excellent. I picked it up not long ago, and I really enjoy it.
Oh, okay. I'm burning my way through Luke Cage. I love that show. I'm burning my way through The Expanse. I'm still trying to catch up on Humans and Westworld, of course. So, the random shit that we watch just to have fun. So, guys,
It's all good inspiration. That's the thing.
Fun Heresy.
Inspiration and great for telling stories.
Absolutely.
So to see New Wave has seen some of the gameplay for Vampire.
It's real good. I recommend.
Okay. As soon as it comes down below $60, I'd be happy to try.
I'm waiting for Call of Cthulhu.
The game that I'm
definitely.
most looking forward to, and it's the Changeling player in me. There's a game from id Software that's coming out in the nearish future. I say nearish future. I think August. Called We Happy Few.
Oh,
That's
Neil Mott.
yeah. Sign me up.
Oh,
All
that does look fun. That
All
one
the
does,
things.
and it's
Yes.
creepy. It is one of the creepiest games I've seen outside of BioShock.
Exactly.
Also, I want to say Focus Home Interactive is working on a Werewolf the Apocalypse video game.
Yeah, I
as
saw
well.
that.
Hmm.
And
Oh yeah,
That
the
looks
Paradox
cool.
is handing out licensing right and left.
Given what I've played so far of Vampire, I'm really looking forward to that. I think they can do a great job with it.
I'm always been fond of id stuff. And I'm glad to see they're still around. So, all right, guys, I want to thank everybody again for coming and joining us tonight, and I want my guests to go ahead and give us their sign-offs. Let's start with Sabrina. Or not Sabrina, dang it. Sarah.
No problem. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate all of you. Thank you to all the listeners. Thanks for coming on, and we hope to have you join us again next time.
Thijs.
Well, thank you all for being here listening. And I want to wish you a great Independence Day.
Awesome.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
And Dan.
This is a thank you from Dan of the Pacific Northwest, the resident WAD lore nerd. Thank you for listening to my bejabbering. Thank you to my fellow co-guests and hosts. And for the love of God, people, play nice.
One more. After I get this last one in for Peter to give his sign off, if you guys have plugs, I'll give you a shot. I'll give you guys a chance to get your stuff in before we go off for the night. So.
Oh, damn. Okay, sure.
So Peter, your sign off, man.
I don't have any plugs, but I will sign off. Thanks for having me. This was a blast. I don't often get to talk about Mage with people that have read a lot of the source material, so this was a real treat for me.
Yeah,
And
anytime,
I hope to be
Peter.
back at some point.
Well, oh God, yeah, you're on the list now, which means that, like Dan, you will be coming back again. I have a feeling.
See what I've signed you up for, Peter? Peter and I know each other in real life.
Oh,
so.
IRL, okay. So, all right, who's got their plug first? Sarah, do you have anything that you...
Not at the moment. I'm still kind of kicking around. I've got a lot going on in my real life right now, but I'm still kind of kicking around ideas for doing a crossover-themed podcast. So I'm still kind of planning that and talking a bit with, I don't know if any of you gentlemen know him, but Victor Kinzer.
Oh, yeah, I know Brother Victor. He's been on the show more
I
than
know
anybody.
you. I know you do, Peter, but I didn't know if anybody else here did. I'm talking a bit with him about it. He's one of the co-hosts of the Changeling podcast, Walking Away from Arcadia, which I was on recently as well. So there's an episode about how White Wolf interprets disability on there that I interviewed for. I've got about an hour-long interview on there if anybody's interested.
I need to go back and read and watch that.
That's really all I've got right now.
All right. Dan, you got anything you need to...
Oh, for once I do. I'm going to be working on a comic anthology over the next 10 months or so.
That's awesome.
The anthology is going to be entitled Life Finds a Way. It's stories of post-apocalyptic situations where people have rebuilt And the story's themes are all about hope and progress. It's about how humanity finds ways to move past apocalyptic situations, and we will be doing a relatively open call.
Awesome.
Okay.
Peter, you got anything you need to plug?
No, not yet, but hopefully by the next time you have me on, I'll have something more concrete to talk about.
Awesome. That'd be great. Thijs?
The same goes for me. No plugins at this moment.
Well, now that we've had you on, you realize that it's painless. We can get you guys back on more often. That would be fun.
Yeah.
After we sign off, I want to get an idea of what your strengths are. We already know mage, but we'll see what else we can sign you up for here. So, everybody, say goodnight.
Good night.
Night all.
Bye.